Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first official lecture, which I'm super excited about. You're all going to meet Stuart in just a second, but before I pass it over to Stuart, I just wanted to do some quick reminders, some quick housekeeping to make sure that you all have a really smooth experience today. So one thing that we'll always do is we'll always have some official announcements here on the screen, as you can see as you log in. So definitely take a chance to a moment to read it when you can, but a lot of it will be pretty repetitive. We'll just ask you to, of course, open up your Slack. And if you have any questions, you could always direct them to that 03 Extra Help channel. And then, of course, if you had any additional questions after a lecture, you're always welcome to reach out to your data coach or DC, Rahul, via a Slack DM, or if you have any other questions. But real quick, just to make sure that we are all oriented here, is I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully, all of you at this point are now in the training site. If you're not, definitely log in and we can drop that down in the live session chat. You'll want to log in. But once you're logged in, for today's lesson, it's what is data literacy? And before we even open that, I just also want to remind you all to make sure you have Slack open. That's the way we're going to communicate with Stuart as he asks questions. So, of course, under the resources tab, you'll find the Slack, and you can just go ahead and launch the web-based browser from there. And then in regards to today's lecture materials, they live under the course materials. Today is what is data literacy? So you'll click that and we will be using this lecture, the lecture Codio for today. Just so you all know, the PDF version is the exact same version you see on Codio, just a PDF version, just because we know sometimes some people like to print them out. So that's just a way that you can do that, totally optional for your use. But for the purpose of today, we will use the What is Data Literacy lecture, Codio. And then I'll talk about the knowledge check at the end. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass over to Stuart. I did introduce you to them on Monday, Stuart, but if you want to give them another introduction, I want to make sure you have the right justice there to introduce yourself. And with that, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Catherine. Hi, everyone. Excited to be here today. As I mentioned in Slack, I'm really excited to get started today and get to know you all live. And I'm really excited for active participation as we go through the courses, twice a week, most weeks, once this week. So again, really excited. Today, we're going to talk about data literacy, as Catherine mentioned. And in future weeks, we'll really start digging into tools and techniques. Today, we're just going to sort of set the groundwork for what we plan on doing over the course of the coming weeks. So let me take a couple of minutes. I'm going to do a more thorough introduction of myself, but I want to begin sort of getting the technical elements, just making sure that I'm sharing my screen with you and a couple of other items like that. So just give me one moment. Okay. There we go. All right. And that always kind of throws Zoom all over the screen, but we should be set. So to give you a little bit about my background, I know Catherine talked to you about who I am. I originate today out of Portland, Oregon. I'm joining you today from Portland, Oregon. I've spent the last 30 years or so in data science and marketing science before we called them that. When we just said you were in analytics and working in databases, really the first thing I did was work at finance companies at JP Morgan Chase and HSBC. And then 20 years ago, I moved over into advertising and working with brands that you all know: Google, Starbucks, Gatorade, working for, energy companies like Southern Commonwealth Edison and others to just really help them identify their audiences, tell great data stories, and really drive action through science-based data decision-making, whether it's in marketing or user experience or consumer flows, customer flows through their processes, pipeline analysis for B2B deals. So that's really where I hail from. My last roles before doing what I do today, which is my own independent consultancy, is heading up analytics at an Amazon accelerator and helping brands basically sell efficiently, effectively, and profitably on Amazon. So what I want to do today is really get us started hopping in, and as you go through, ask any questions you want that wherever you want, where there's where we need more clarity, and Rahul and I will kind of work through those as we're moving through the content. In terms of data literacy, I'm not going to talk a lot about the history of data literacy because I'm not really a historian. I'm more of a practitioner. But I will say that, if you think about literacy just as a topic, we take for granted today that the vast majority of people that we speak to on a daily basis are literate in terms of, language, right? That there's language literacy. And that's been something that has been true for years, but it wasn't always true, right? If you go back to Middle Ages and really if you go back even to the early founding of the U.S. and through the Great Depression, literacy was not something that you would take for granted. But the same is sort of true today. We've moved into a place where we understand that language literacy and written and spoken language is important. Over the last 20 years, it's become more and more important to think about data literacy. And I kind of want to talk through like why a little bit that's important, right? When you think about data literacy and data fluency, I'm going to go through a few items that aren't in your coursework, but we'll come back to them, and I'll give you link outs to those if you want to explore them further on your own later, right? But you think about data fluency and data literacy, go back not too many years. You go back 8 years to 2016, and the statistics, suggests that really only about 25% of the workforce, 25% of all people in the U.S. workforce are data literate, that are savvy about data, or that are, sort of influencers of data. And that, 64% just really don't have that. So what does that mean? What it means is that getting to a place of data literacy as a corporation is incredibly important. Think about the competitive advantages that gives you. And as a individual within an organization, the ability to be one of that 36% that are data literate gives you opportunities and gives you that chance to really shine and to make an impact. You think about data-driven decisions. Some of the research that's been done by Harvard Business Review and others, it's not just about making good decisions, but the outcomes of those decisions, right? So if you think about what did data-driven decisions deliver, the research shows that you're 23 times more likely to acquire more customers than organizations that don't make data-driven decisions, that aren't data literate. You're 6 times more likely to keep those customers, and you're 19 times more likely to make profitable relationships with those customers because your organization is data literate and making data-driven decisions. So let's come back to the content a little bit. What is data literacy then? What it really means is that we're able to read and write and think and translate just like we would in other language, or really even in math. If you're literate in a language, it means that you can not only read information that others are printing, but you can translate that into stories and action. It means that you can begin to think about data in a way that helps you build and write and translate information as well. And so if we think about reading data, what we mean by that is that we understand the symbols and the tools and the narratives that are being presented to us, and we can interpret that information in a way that allows us to synthesize that with our current understanding and to begin to think about how we would be taking action based upon that. So in your coursework for this week, there's a variety of dashboards, and I have those up so we can kind of go through those. And a few discussion points I think we can go through as well. So if you think about, the beginning of COVID, and it was a scary time for many. And when it first broke out, we just didn't have information. We didn't have the data we thought we needed. And so Johns Hopkins put together a publicly available live dashboard that many people followed on a regular basis to watch as we recorded caseloads to see if we were, sort of bending the curve or if we were, limiting the curve when COVID first arrived. And we were seeing and how it was rolling out across various countries. And so if we kind of take a look at that dashboard, this is a live version of it. In Codio, you can also click out to it. One of the areas I'd love to have a conversation about with this is when we think about data too, what I want you to be thinking about as we go through this course is where are the gaps in my understanding? Data is messy. Data is always underlying data. There are always questions that we need to be asking about the information. Does this seem reasonable? What are the possible blind spots in the information that I have? So if we think about the discussion guide, just thinking about the map itself, let's take a look at the John Hopkins data and kind of get a sense for, where does it appear in their data visualizations that the majority of cases occurred? We can use the live chat to kind of talk about that. Where does it appear on this chart that the majority of COVID cases would have appeared, that we would have been most concerned? I'll give everybody a moment to sort of take a look here.
Hi, my name is Nefertari. How you doing?
Hi, good.
Good. I'm not sure if I just can't find my chat button or what, but I wanted to answer the question. From
Oh,
my
you can,
view, it
yeah, you
looks
can
like
do it all in Slack. We'll do it all in Slack, but yeah. And you can also, by
okay.
the way, I should have said that. Feel free at any time to come off mute, and we're going to have conversations as we go through this course.
Okay, so based on what I'm seeing, the highest number of cases by country and deaths, it looks like, is in the U.S.
And how do you and how do we interpret that? Let's this is exactly what this says, right? That's exactly what this shows, right? Is that the highest number of cases, um, you know, at this point in the data, and this should be a wrapped up data. They stopped collecting data, would be in the U.S. So how do we think about that as a group? I mean, were there no cases in Africa, no cases in Asia? Does that make sense? Why might that be the case? And Paula, Europe, yeah, like US and Europe. Fair number of cases in Brazil.
Higher populations.
Maybe. But what about China and India? Like those are two of the most heavily populated countries in the globe. So Ashley says lack of reporting, data collection. Yeah, so if you think about this is the data that's publicly available from different health ministries, right? So not as much infrastructure. Yeah, Ben. I don't know, Ben. Let me know if you go by Ben or Benjamin. Everybody, tell me if I in the chat or verbally if I don't get your name right. But for Benjamin, exactly that. Reporting structures. Are the reporting structures in place? Can we reach the people? Is there testing in place? Right. When we first came out, a lot of the resources, the money, the resources, the infrastructure to even run the tests was located in more developed countries, in Europe, in North America, in parts of South America, in economies in Asia. But some of those well-developed economies just didn't report the information. And so one of the things I want you to think about as we go through and we think about data literacy, one of the most critical things I think in terms of data literacy is asking tough questions of our own data and understanding where, passing a sniff test. I had a colleague that used to say, for this to be true, for what I'm saying with this data to be true, what else would have to be true, right? Is it plausible that the analysis that I presented looks viable? I just had a conversation not too long ago. If you think about, I spent some time at a regulatory agency working in government regulation of the telecommunications and natural gas and electric industries. And part of the reason why we have so many zip codes, right? Not zip codes, but area codes. Part of the reason why we have so many area codes is because individual telephone companies went before the public utility commissions and said, we think as a company that we will have 20% of the market and that the market will grow at X percent. But 20 companies went before the public utility commission and said, we will all have 20% of the market. Well, you can't have 400% of the market, right? But did anybody look at the whole and say, wait, are we really going to need that many area codes? Because how can all of you have 20% of the market? But that's what they all estimated, because they're all going to be successful, but they're 20 and they all expect to have 20% of the market. So we had an overabundance of estimation. So as we go through, like I said, I just want to make sure, thank you for jumping into the conversation and participating. I appreciate it. That's really exactly what I wanted to draw out, was that there are always blind spots in data, and first understanding the information, what are its limitations before we even set upon the process of asking business questions and visualizing data is a really critical part of data literacy. Another area that we might think about is dashboarding and real-time dashboarding. So this is an example of a dashboard, right? This is an example of dashboard, the COVID data from Johns Hopkins. Many people use dashboards to understand e-commerce. So I mentioned that in my most recent prior heading up of an organization, it was at a Amazon Accelerator, and we had custom dashboards for all of our clients that did very much what Google Analytics here does today. And so when we think about a dashboard like this, and I think the links in your notes ask you to come into sort of monetization and e-commerce purchases. I'm going to open this up a little bit more because I don't think you can see the entire dashboard. So give me 1 second. So when we take a look at this information, we're able to draw some pretty quick data-driven decisions, right? What pops out to you here in terms of what we should think about as a company? What should we sell more of? What do we need more of? What are we selling the most of? And I've got my Slack down a little bit, so here we go. Now I've got Slack back up. What are we selling the most of? Most might have two answers. Depends on your perspective.
You're selling the most of number two based off quantity, but not based
Yeah,
off of revenue.
Yeah, so we're selling the most of these Chrome, Dino, Warm, and Cozy accessory packs. Yeah, looks like the Android collective. And yeah, Paula, based on revenue, yeah, we might be selling something more. So if you think about what we want to do as a company, it would appear that we deliver potentially better results by selling, recycled backpacks at a higher average order value. I mean, you think about companies, right? The things that are going to drive your business are, yes, the number of sales and the units sold, but also average order value. It's something that small businesses often that I consult with struggle with. They struggle with all of those, but finding ways, it's part of the reason why you'll see companies make decisions that orders need to be above a certain amount. Free shipping on orders over $150. Why? Because they're trying to get average order values up to make profitability more effective. And so they know that they sell many small things, but they need you to add a couple of larger items to make that shipping cost effective. Yeah, and Paula, you mentioned what about margin, right? We don't have margin in here, but I think we could probably draw some pretty quick conclusions related to margin. I mean, you can take, and so a few other things, right? Like look at this added to cart, this Hello Android black tea. Wow, like 2,700 people added, or nearly a little under 50, probably like 40% or so of people that saw the tea added to cart, but nobody purchased it. Oh, maybe we have a problem with shipping. People wanted that item. I don't know how much that tea has cost us, but maybe they saw, they got to cart, they started to purchase, and they realized that the cost of shipping was just too high. A tea that costs $15 with $10 shipping charges or something. So we can draw some pretty quick conclusions about areas we might want to further explore. Hypotheses that we're creating, right? We're creating a hypothesis that says maybe there's something wrong with this particular line item that we want to explore more about. Or, the Super G might have higher margins or it might have low margins. I don't know what our wholesale cost is for this recycled backpack, right? There's some other kind of interesting things. You see these items where, what did we do here for the Android collectible? Was it only available for a limited time? Did we announce it with limited stock? Maybe we sold out. We had one day. This happens a lot with when you consult with companies like Nike and others. Shoe drop culture is a big item. Supreme, if you've ever seen the lines outside of a Supreme store, everyone knows when the new shoes are dropping and when the limited editions are going to be in. And so you see these kind of spikes in their traffic and their sales. I'm not sure why here. Could be maybe that's one hypothesis. We dropped on a particular day. But if you were the sales manager in this particular product, or you might know that we had a large corporate order. Maybe these are, some type of bobblehead, I don't know, whatever that we're selling to companies. So anyway, the point is that, we can get really interesting information near real time and use that information to really drive product selection, business decisions. When you think of a B2B space, you start thinking about things like account-based marketing. How effective is my marketing at driving funnel activity from stage 0 to stage 5, or however you number your stages, right? Am I getting new contacts? Am I moving that particular company further down the stage? Is my marketing directing that organization further down the stage? And what particular, you can think about purchase journeys and content journeys, and think about what is the, I have a huge abandonment rate. What is my abandonment rate? How am I moving people down the stages? What can I do at each stage to improve? If I've moved you to stage 2 and I have an opportunity, why are opportunities not moving to close? And so we'll talk about ways we can do data visualizations that can begin to help us understand that those type of items. We come back to our work. So the other thing that we can think about is, I'm going to use a slightly different data visualization because there's one I personally find just stunning with relation to observational data of temperature. And so one of the things is, when we talk about the different types of ways that we want to present, part of the thinking and the writing, and even really the translation is, how can I tell this story in a compelling way? It's a little hard, to be honest, when you look at this chart, even this particular dashboard, and you time lapse it. It's interesting. You can see the sort of global airstreams and how temperature and carbon dioxide, breathe back and forth between the north and south poles, depending on if it's summer or winter. You can kind of see the earth breathe and see carbon dioxide as it gets absorbed by plant vegetation and trees and then gets released or not absorbed, at least in the winter as foliage falls. But I find that there's a different, let me know if you've ever seen this in the comments, but I find this spiral chart of the same information. So you think about style of presentation is really important to data literacy. Here's one style of presenting the information, and here's another style. And you can decide for yourself which is more compelling when you think about the case to be made about, you know, climate change or temperature change around the world. So this is a really quick 1-minute video. We could probably speed up our playback to 1.5. Right? So you start to see, okay, wait, we started to exceed a particular, you know, temperature change. And now we're consistently outside of that temperature. And now we're getting closer and closer to another barrier. Right? And so it's really interesting when you think about the ways you visualize data. This tells a story that maybe our audiences can understand a little bit more clearly, I would argue, than how they need to try to interpret this information, right? This information is interesting. It's really, it tells a different tale, right? It tells a tale of who is producing and who are our largest producers. But yeah, as Nefertiti, I totally agree with you. Like this idea of that spiral visualization. If I presented, so think about this, like what a lot of people do is, I would argue early when you're just getting into data analysis, a lot of people present their work. They present their data. And it's really hard for visual learners, as Nefertiti says, to understand tables and data. So you need to understand your audience. And there are different views of being able to present that data. Okay, so let's kind of hop through. I'm going to go into our next piece. You can think about the Census Bureau data too. And so let's look at a piece of data when we talk about interrogating that data. I'm going to hop over to the Census Bureau. I mean, they take snapshots, as you probably all know, at a variety of different points, you know, every 10 years, a full census, but they do a lot of other studies and surveys. The Labor Bureau and the Census run samples. Every 10 years, they're sort of mandated by the Constitution to run a full survey of every person living in the US, citizen or non-citizen, every living person in the US. But in between, they also run other studies. And so I'm just pulling this up. One of the questions this week is sort of, what pops out to you in the table of information here? What do you think is, yeah, that makes sense? And what do you sort of look at it and you think, that's surprising. I wouldn't have, what is that? What's that number? That's, I see Nefertiti typing. The number without healthcare coverage. What surprised you about that? Seem high, seem low?
For me, that 8% is a little concerning. Like I know for me, I it's worth it for me. Like I wouldn't go to an area where people are like, "Hey, we don't have health care here. I'm gonna steer away from them because you that's something you gotta have at this point in life."
Yeah, you'd think in a fully, by the way, anything I ever say here, I don't mean, just to let you all know, I don't mean in any political pro or con way, but you know, your reaction is 8% seems high for one of the world's largest economies, the most developed economies. Seems high. And maybe my reaction is, it seems really low given what I experience on a daily basis, right? What I hear in the news or what I see on a daily basis, this seems really low. to me a little bit. I mean, given what I would think. So that's interesting number. Worth further, but I hear you. Many on this call probably think they would never go without healthcare coverage for their family or themselves. So why is this so high? Um, and yet, when you look at some of these other aspects, what else pops out? So Morgan, we're going to come back to Nefertiti, the employment rate too. Bachelor's degree sounds low. Yeah, bachelor's degree are higher, 36%. So one of the things that maybe this helps us also think about is our own biases that we bring to data, right? I find this all the time in the advertising world that I work in. I feel that often I have to represent those that aren't represented in that room, because the room of advertising, and you can probably see it when you're, the advertising agencies that support Google, where are they located? LA, Seattle, New York, Chicago, who are the people in that room? Typically 25 to 45-year-old, young, creative, Gen Z, millennial. So, when you think about it, where's all the money? All the money currently is with with the boomer generation. They have all the money, but advertising isn't towards them because the people in the room, they aren't in the room deciding the advertising. And so there's times when we have to think about our own biases as well. Many or most on this call may have a bachelor's degree or maybe not, but I think our biases that we bring to data, we sometimes need to check. And it can be humbling and interesting to think, wait, the median household income, $74,000. I would have thought it was lower, maybe. I remember not so long ago when it was 45, and it's 75 now. But I think if you're living in a large city, you might think, how does a household make it on $75,000 if I'm joining this lecture from New York? How are they making it in some of those cities? But it's a median. Um, uh, Nefertiti, you mentioned in your comment employment rate.
So yeah, I would say employment rate solely because I know people that are unemployed and I know a lot of people that are struggling out here. So it's like for it to say 60.3% of people are employed, and I get like you said, it's an average. It's not just including my local area, but that's where that bias comes in, right? The environment I'm in doesn't reflect the same thing. Even with the bachelor's degree, I think I'm the highest person in my family. I'm one of the higher. I'm more knowledgeable in this aspect in my family. So it's kind of like you take a few of these and you're like, okay, independently they're showing something cool, but when you start to lump them together, they look weird.
Yeah, it's really kind of interesting. You think about 35% bachelor's degree, and you might, it depends on the perspective you're bringing to it, right? Like if I think of my family, it's not my family doesn't have 40% bachelor's degrees. So interesting. But the professional world that I travel in, it's probably near 80%, 90%. I don't know. So I've never really pulled it. Unemployment rate is something very similar. I mean, you would hear that the unemployment rate, so the opposite of employment rate would be unemployment rates, right? So if you think it's 60% are employed, 40% are unemployed? No, I mean, the unemployment rate's a different definition. You have to actively be seeking employment. So if you're retired, you're not employed, but you're not part of the unemployed seeking employment. If you're in the military, you're employed, but and so you are part of the denominator, but you're not actively seeking other employment. So the way they sort of, if you've given up, like you mentioned, Nefertiti, there's a lot of people that's struggling, but if those people aren't necessarily searching, if some aren't necessarily searching, maybe they've decided to go a different route, right? Contribute more to the household in other ways. Then they're not part of they're not employed, but they're not unemployed, if that makes sense. Anyway, I think very interesting, data just kind of shows how we need to think about what does the data tell us? What does it really tell us? And what doesn't it tell us? Because data doesn't tell us everything. And sometimes we have to create an initial hypothesis and then do more research, do more exploring. And Bailey, you're saying like, does it consider children for the employment rate? I don't know, actually. That's a really good question. I don't know if this particular number includes the total population, because that 331 is not adults, right? That 331 is total, so that would include children. And you would hope that would be true because our total housing units is only 140 million. So if that was adults, even at 150 million, you would be a 10% homeless rate or something, or you'd have a lot of sort of multi-generational or other housing situations if you didn't have, sort of family relationships that were parent-child to get that total population number down to more like the housing unit number. But you can see that too about like total households and housing units. We've had a growing unemployment in the US, but we have more housing units than we have households. So that shouldn't necessarily be the case. Or maybe it should. Your choice. Okay, I'm going to try to make sure we're clear on time as well. So keep me honest, Rahul, and everyone, like as we go through. Let's hop over and talk a little bit more about, I'll let you read about web scraping API. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. There are some really interesting ways and tools that I can share with you about how we can do some web scraping to pull information. If you see a table of data anywhere on the web, you can pull that data into Excel. You can pull that data in via Python. You can bring that data really quickly into your analyses if you see it anywhere on the web. And Rahul and I and others do a lot of work with APIs, which is essentially, you're like, well, what is an API? You use an API pretty much daily. If you go to the bank and you enter your PIN, you are engaging with an API. An API is application programming interface. What it does is it sets the rules and conditions for basically accessing data and information between databases. So if you think about like when you go to the bank and you insert your debit card, you enter in a PIN, you are accessing the API, which accesses a large database that contains records about your checking or savings or credit card or whatever account you're using. When you're at the store and you swipe your card or pay, same thing. So you're using APIs essentially all the time. But we have those same kind of things that allow us to connect data to things like Looker Studio. And so that's one of the next. So what you can do in Looker Studio is you can connect data. You can go in and you can decide all of the different data sources that you would like to connect to Looker Studio as a data visualization. Now it's predominantly, because it's Google, it's predominantly marketing data, but you could connect data from Google Sheets, online Excel, et cetera, into your Looker Studio to be able to data visualize it. And so when you think about data visualizations, this is another example where there's some really interesting data visualizations that we can explore here. And the goal of telling a story is to tell the story in a way that your audience wants to hear it. Sometimes that story is going to be a story that's, well, this looks like, let's see if it pops. This was a demo, but I was just noticing, I thought it might be interesting to take a look at. Well, it's not going to be interesting. So sometimes you can see it from here, though. Sometimes it's going to be qualitative. Some people in your organization are going to want to know, what did the user say? Sometimes they're going to want to know what was the average rating or the average sale price or the average deal that we did. Sometimes they're going to want to know, how did business, I create waterfall visualizations all the time when it relates especially to budget. So when I'm helping with our local PTO with their budgets, I'm typically putting together a waterfall. This is where we started the quarter. This is how you spent your money. This is where we ended the quarter. This is how much we made in donations. And this is what we spent on, fall field trips. And so this gives you a sense of, where did we start the year? What were the specific categories that caused us to spend? what were the specific categories or places where it's not, we typically don't do it in a year fashion like this, but you would typically do it from like point A to point B and show how things changed over time. I want to, I'd encourage you to take a look at Looker Studio, and we'll also provide a link to one that I love, which is flowing data. And so what I'd love to do is kind of give you a moment to kind of take a look at flowing data and just kind of tell me if there's any interesting data visualizations that stand out to you that you think are interesting. I think, I'm not sure, I think Paula, it might have been you that said as a visual learner. Oh, no, sorry. Nefertiri, you were saying as a visual learner. Those of you that are visual learners, which types of these charts really stand out to you? Which do you find most interesting? Interesting ways to answer questions. Race and occupation. Let's see that. Where's, oh, here we go. Let's pop in there. Let's just take a look really quick. Most likely jobs by race and ethnicity. Interesting. Yeah. So we can actually drill in and see like which jobs are most likely by race. So if we look at like, oh, that's interesting, right? Like, so we can start to see that it seems like there's sort of a bias, right? That you can sort of see the inherent bias, right? That there isn't a stereotyping of some races, but there maybe is a stereotyping of other races. So some races look like they are they're, whether it's the socioeconomics, let's say, pushes some groups towards more of the service industry, sales and service related. Some socioeconomics, and it could be a lot of different socioeconomics, family, it could be, wealth, it could be community, it could be other types of things that prevent people from moving. But if you think about, uh, by race, we've got computer science and some of there seems like there's a push through socioeconomics to, more of the sciences and courses. Really interesting. Yeah, that's really, really interesting. And so you can kind of, that would be one of my takeaways from this was, how do you interpret this? One of the things I would probably say is the more you push them away from the middle, the more you're seeing more of a bias. So you're seeing transportation and production and, farming, why is that? Is that something culturally that we need to address? Is that something socioeconomically, um, you know, what other items look interesting we might want to explore?
I think for me, it's kind of going to go a little against what I said earlier. I'm a visual learner, but when I'm now analyzing data, I kind of want it in simple form. I don't want to have to dig for the story. I kind of want it right in my face. So
Yeah, so you
I'm
think
one
like,
of those old school people.
would you say that this is like overly complex?
It is. It's a lot. For
Yeah.
someone to just look at it and say, "Hey, I kind of get the story of what you're trying to tell me." It's a lot going on. I'm gonna have to take a minute and really dig into it.
Yeah.
A basic bar graph or a line graph or there's some less intense ones that I could just be like, "Okay, I see it. I get it. It's easy. I know what you're looking for. I know what I'm looking at." This, I'm gonna take time to digest it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's amazing that you bring that up. I appreciate that. Thank you for that contribution because I mentioned that I like to use, we went over to Looker. Let me go back there for a second. I mentioned that I like to do waterfalls. I can tell you that Waterfalls are not well received by all audiences. If you're used to looking at a waterfall, you might like them. Many people don't like looking at waterfalls because it's not something they look at regularly. And so your audience may not love it. And I hear, that you bring up a really amazing point, which is that I think it might have been Einstein that said it, but I'm going to credit to him, even if he didn't, that the better you understand something, the more simpler you can explain it.
I like to tell people I'm one of those people I can digest information and kind of give you the layman's term of it all, right? I want to dumb it down for everybody to easily understand what I'm saying. It helps and hurts me, but it's like I want the common man to know that we can read this too, right?
Yeah.
So your waterfall, I like that it's green and red. So I know, okay, green, that means I'm making money. Red means I'm losing money. I want to lean more toward the green. So that's simple, and it kind of is irrelevant to us because we do a lot more, our things are like more extravagant, but to the everyday Joe, that green and red might just be enough to say, okay, I understand what you're saying to me.
Well, and to senior management, right? If you are senior management or you're presenting to senior management, you may have 15 minutes of my attention. I need to know, what is the problem? What is the solution? What are the risks? And what are the recommended next steps? GM used to have what they call the 4-blocker approach. You had to tell a story, and Amazon does something very similar today, where in one page, you have to tell me everything I need to know about this situation. And it really requires the team to distill the information down to a very simple story. This is the problem. This is the evidence of the problem. This is what we recommend and the likely impact and next steps. All has to go on one slide. And you don't have much time. You don't have much time to tell the story. And so I hear you. This is for many people, this may be, I think it's a little it's too complex for me. I mean, it's probably too complex for many people. Maybe this is a simpler. This seems okay, very well. Like, how well do you rest? I guess when you finally hit retirement, you have a chance to rest a bit more, maybe, right? What's the story there? And you bring up a really important point that I'll move on beyond these charts, but you bring up a really important point, which is when we do our analysis and when you're doing your projects, you never want the audience to have to do the work, right? So if you have two numbers that should be in relation to each other, you want them to clearly see maybe something like this, right? Like, what is the average age? What's the typical age that people marry at? You want to really highlight what is the part of the story that you want to tell me, and what action do I need to take from this? It needs to be pretty straightforward and pretty obvious. And if you see your audience sort of calculating, okay, I see these two numbers, but they're trying to do some division in their head because they're trying to figure out, like, something like was raised earlier, like margin. They're trying to figure out, well, what margin am I making? We need to have margin, right? Maybe we give up something else because we need to focus on what products we make the most margin on, which products we sell the most volume on, the most total profit. Let's focus on those kind of areas. So, all right, let's hop back over to Codio, and we'll kind of I mentioned that Looker is sort of was one of our tools. We are going to next Tuesday start hopping into Excel, and I would like to ask you all a question. And it'll take me just a second to get this into the chat, but I just want to understand as we hop into next week. Look, I know you've very likely taken a pre-survey for us, but I just want to ask today. Let me do that, and then let me add a couple of reactions really quick. So don't respond yet. Let me you can tag whichever of these you feel with relation to. I just want to get a good sense for what's your experience so far if you want to take the poll that's in Slack with Excel, where would you say your experience is so far? This will help me understand the sort of speed with which we go through content and how much I focus on sort of tips, tricks, and really, I'd love for you all as we go through this to hop in with your own tips and tricks, right? We won't talk about every shortcut, and if you have shortcuts you feel that the team would gain from, stop us. Let's talk about it. I think we're pretty set on voting, so it looks like everybody is sort of at least the one vote is me, but just at the beginning of the journey. So everyone's solid, maybe not quite an expert, but a third feel like you're experts, and 2/3 feel like sort of solid, but not an expert. So we are going to spend some time getting everybody to the same level of understanding over the next couple of weeks. And then we're going to hop into some other tools. And I'll ask you at that time what your experience is beyond it. So I won't spend too much time here today because you all really understand Excel. But the idea is that at some point we want to move beyond Excel. The reason why we talk about things like Looker, Data Studio, is because Excel can do some visualization, but it is a lot of work to do it's a lot of work to do a waterfall chart in Excel. If you've created one in Excel, it takes some time and effort, typically. It's been better over time, but basic data visualization, but you're never going to create, not like you necessarily, let me go back. Not like you want to, as we talked about, maybe it's too difficult, but some of those visualizations like we showed, like the bubble charts and the dynamic moving charts, and like you're never going to create in Excel. You're probably not going to create those you're not going to create them in SQL either, but you can start to make things like that when you get moving into Python and the like. So we're going to spend a fair amount of the course also talking about SQL and Python, and really focusing on how we can use that to work with data that's bigger and more complex than we can really handle with Excel. And so SQL is just a structured query language. Some people will call it SQL. I call it SQL. That's how we called it when I was starting to program. But SQL or SQL, and we're going to be using that to access really large databases to get. There are some organizations that's really all they do. I worked with a mutual insurance company in Washington State last year that they needed to add Python programming teams to their team. So I helped them evaluate talent and staff the talent for their organizations. But for the most part, their data engineers are only experienced in SQL. But it's such a powerful language that they can do all of the financial reporting, all of the sales reporting. They can do any reporting they need just with structured query language. And there's various forms of it. You will find if the organization moves and switches to various platforms that there's slight differences, but they all have the same basic underpinning. And so we'll talk about that. And then as you start getting into, AI is hot these days, you start moving into things like AI. That is not the space for Excel or SQL. That is the space for programming languages like Python and others, but where you're able to actually build and develop and design models. You can build some models in Excel, but not really sophisticated, and SQL doesn't do that at all. So we would move over and start talking about Python at that point. How do you build models, create predictions, create simulations? Okay. And so, ultimately translating data, I'm going to kind of close a bit of our session today and open it to questions with a conversation around translating data. Now, there's a Swedish scholar in your notes here, Hans Rosling, which I would encourage you to watch his TED Talk. It's really interesting. I'm going to take you over to somebody else though, because I want you to take a look. So I want you to take a look also. Potentially, it's not part of the course, but if you find these things fascinating, like I do, if you find that you want a pick me up in a way, take a look at Steven Pinker. I'm not sure how many people. Does anybody go ahead and put a thumbs up if on the post I just put in, the link I just put in, if you know him. I don't know if you have heard of him vaguely, maybe directly. I'm gonna play a couple of. So for Rahul and I, not probably not fair for Rahul and I to say we know him, but he's a sociologist that has created. He wrote a book that was released a couple of years ago. Fascinating book about how what we hear in our social circles and what we hear in the news would lead you to believe that we live in a very difficult time. But that if you actually look at the data, and I think, some compelling visualizations, that we live in the best time that the Homo sapiens have ever seen. I'll play just a couple seconds of his video, and then I want to take over to some charts, but.
Is it not a matter of faith or having an optimistic temperament or seeing the glass as half full? It's a testable hypothesis. For all their differences, people largely agree on what goes into human well-being. Life, health, sustenance, prosperity, peace, freedom, safety, knowledge, leisure, happiness. All of these things can be measured. If they have improved over time, that, I submit, is progress. Let's go to.
So I'm going to let you watch the rest of his video. I'm going to switch over to actually a site that, New York Post. I'm not trying to sponsor any particular post. They have a nice summary of some of his slides. So if you think about, where are we? Well, if you look at Google Trends, you would see that there are less searches for racist jokes or sexist jokes or homophobic jokes. If you feel like that's a part of progress, if you feel like spending less money on the basics, right? Do we have more money since 1930? Every year we've had more money that we can spend on disposable items, on luxury goods, right? Not the basics. So we spend less money on food, although inflation's been high lately. We traditionally have spent less money on food than we have spent on other items over the course of time. One of the things I would look at in some of these charts is, well, they don't end at the same period. So what's happened in the last, 7 years? Are we still making progress? But, I mentioned before, as of, the early 1900s, it was not a given that even people in the US were literate in terms of languages, be able to read and write. And, it's pretty much across the world, we assume that most cultures and most societies around the world are literate, and most people in those societies are literate. Life expectancy, I think we would all pretty much agree that most people want to live longer. And so, average life expectancy has been on the rise. I got to back out of that for a long period of time. I can't get out of that. Let me go back. So average life expectancy has been on the rise over the course of history. The number of deaths per year per 1,000 people from falls and drowning and fire and, all of that on the decline. What's that? What is the, I want to end us on a positive note, but what's the yellow line?
Poison. They dying from poison.
Yeah, but poison is also would be overdoses. Would be considered a poisoning. So that, that's not been trending in the way we want it to, obviously. So that, but to end us on, more positive points. Oh my gosh. The you know, we could take a look at other elements too, like, the world may seem a scary place, but overall democracies have been winning over the course of the last 200 years and even today. GDP across the globe is, we've seen the kind of domestic growth. The world is richer today than it's ever been, which means that it lifts up most people. And depending on how you feel about growth rate, Elon Musk doesn't feel the same way about declines in growth rate being a positive thing. But, I remember, you may all remember a time when we focused pretty heavily on the idea that growth to zero was a target. Growth zero was a goal globally, that we had a population that the Earth may not be able to sustain if we kept on this sort of upward trajectory. And countries took action and birth rates started to decline. And in some places now we're trying to reverse that decline. In Japan, in most developed countries, the birth rate is below the rate of replacement. And so we're trying to improve that. So, these are just, this is an example. You can see how compelling data visualizations can be when we do them right. Whether, whatever case you want to make from the data. But the idea is that these are simple, easily understandable data visualizations, removing artifacts to just tell a very simple story. So I'm going to come back over to Codio and talk about, I'd like you, as you go through, make sure as you go through, I'd really love it if you took some time, thought about the questions as we go through these, and added to your, consider the discussion questions as you move through. When we talk about thinking with data, again, I mentioned that, it's a little bit about understanding what are the pitfalls of interpreting our data, but what data do we have and what are the benefits and negatives of the data? And then focusing on, what are some good business questions we'd want to ask? You asked some really great business questions as a group when we talked about the Google store data, right? Well, what a margin? What does this data tell us? What decisions do we need to make? And I will also add, on what timeline? A very complex analysis that comes in a day after the decision needed to be made is less valuable than a very simple, not as sophisticated analysis that comes in 3 or 4 days ahead of the decision so that we have time to consider what the decision and actions are that we need to take. And so, often I think people, when they run analysis, think I need to do something groundbreaking, something amazing, something no one has ever done before. But what we really need to do is inform decisions. And groundbreaking research or groundbreaking work or really difficult analysis that doesn't help the decision, that comes in too late, is too complex, is presented in a way that our audience can't easily digest and make an action, doesn't really hit the mark. So anyway, some takeaways from this week are just, I'm going to turn it over to the team to talk about sort of items we need to accomplish in terms of taking, doing the graded material in Codio. But think about what the differences are between reading and writing and translating and thinking about data. And as we start getting into Excel, we'll start taking a look at how we can do that as efficiently and effectively as possible. I will stop sharing in the moment. And Catherine, maybe I'll turn it back over to you to talk a little bit about setting up some expectations for the next, in preparation for Tuesday. What do we need to do to get ready for Tuesday as a group?
Yeah. So for Tuesday, so hopefully now I think everyone is able to access the training site. And if you could just give me like a yes or no in the live session chat, that would be great. Okay, great. Morgan can access. Okay. Getting a lot of yeses. Great. Okay. So, just a couple expectations here. So we know we mentioned that we have a couple of assignments due, and this may take a couple times just as you're getting all familiar with this new tool here, our training site. So one thing to note is there will always be a couple of items due. And I know I mentioned this on Monday, but we'll always have a knowledge check that will be associated with the lesson of the day that we do ask you to complete. Starting tomorrow, we'll release next week's content, and you'll actually see one additional thing. It's going to be called extra practice exercise. Those will actually be optional, but highly encouraged for you to complete. It's just really a way for you to practice out what you've learned. So, one thing to note here with our knowledge check, we will ask that you complete this. So just to kind of recap and revisit, I know we discussed this on Tuesday, but you'll have a couple of questions that you'll need to answer. So you'll just open it up and you'll actually have the opportunity to check your answers right then and there. It is just, this one's 4 questions. And after you're done, you're gonna mark it as complete towards the bottom. As I mentioned on Tuesday, though, if you have something that's not complete, it will notify you, hey, you have not completed the entire lesson. I'm just gonna go ahead and submit yes for the purposes of just showing you all, but don't do what I do and definitely complete it. So you'll just have to type in yes. Once I click that, it's now saying that it's marking the assignment as complete. Sometimes a survey will pop up. You are welcome to do those if you'd like. You can also skip them. And then after that, it should it will redirect you all back to your homepage here. But another thing to note from the lesson that Stuart went through today, the lecture Codio here, I do also want to point out that I don't actually think on this one we had any questions, right? But let me just triple check. Oh, there are some discussion questions here. I know we've kind of maybe talked over some of them, but we just also ask that you complete these as well. And these again are not necessarily going to be marked for accuracy, but more so just like effort and just some, questions for you to also think about as we just kind of start getting our hands dirty now. I know today's lesson is a very like high level overview and very much an intro level overview of what we're about to learn. Ooh, great question, Morgan. Do you need to click submit answer for every discussion point? Yes, I'd say yes, you want to do that. That way the answer goes through. Mhm. Yeah, and then at the very bottom, you'll also click the mark as complete. Yeah, sorry, I realized I did not do that, but yes, you should be doing that. Mhm. Great. Another thing I want to note, and I mentioned this on Tuesday, but I want to mention it again, is you can also find your submissions or what is due, what's coming up to be due here under submissions. So you can also just kind of submit through the workspace by clicking there, and it'll direct you also to the Codio assignment that you need to complete. So there are 2 ways to access these assignments. One other thing I do want to mention here is for anyone that might have missed our program launch recording, if you just click under program launch, that little plus sign, the recording is now available. So another thing to note is the recordings will always be available within 24 hours. However, we do our best to try to get it uploaded a lot sooner than that. But if at any point you don't see it within the 24 hours, let us know. But it will always be there. So you can also see the recordings there. And then the deck from our program launch is also linked here now. Another thing to note is every Friday we will release next week's content. So tomorrow afternoon or tomorrow morning, we'll probably release the content for Tuesday, next Tuesday and next Thursday. One thing that I would highly encourage is, and I'm sure Stuart also encourages this, is that you all read through the lessons before our lectures, or just to get a sense of, kind of what we're about to explore, what you're about to expect. This will really help, kind of get the ground running for the next lecture, because Stuart will really kind of lean in on very important points and kind of elaborate a little bit more. So you'll also have that opportunity too. Okay. Any questions? Right. Okay, great. Stuart, did you have any other final words for them for today?
No, I think just one thing I will say is that in the future sessions, we're going to take a break midway. We didn't today. I hope that was okay with everyone. I just wanted to keep some of the momentum we had going, but we will take a 5 to 10 minute break in between. So we'll do like next Tuesday, we'll do sort of part A, part B. We'll take a little break in between as we're going through Excel. So just realize that like we're not going to jam for an hour and 15 straight every time. We're going to take some breaks, have some discussion. And I do want to say one last thing, which is thank you for hopping in and participating. We'll learn a lot more together by everyone's participation than I want this to be an inclusive conversation. So if you didn't get a chance to participate this week, maybe next week.
Yeah. Absolutely. And yeah, today's obviously a little not like a typical lecture that you'll experience coming next week, as Stuart mentioned. And yeah, absolutely. I think because also we are a pretty small group, we can definitely do a mix of like if you want to talk versus chatting. But what I will say is that everything in the chat, the good news with that is you'll always have access to revisiting it. So if you ever forget a question you asked or something, it might be helpful just to like document it there so you could also revisit it too. But again, these tools are at your disposal, and we want to just make sure that you're able to best use them and leverage off of them in the way that helps you best. So yeah, well, thank you all, and thank you, Stuart, and we will see you all on Tuesday. So the only ask is before Tuesday is just to complete your knowledge check and little discussion questions within the lecture before Tuesday's next lecture. And we'll also post a reminder in Slack once we've released next week's content for you all to also take a look at. Okay. All right. Well, I hope you all have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you all next week.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.